She sensed trouble long before she saw it. The dust rising beyond the far fence line carried a strange tension with it, the kind that makes a person stand still and listen with their whole chest. In that quiet early light, the town of Red Bluff had barely begun to stir. Chickens clucked behind wooden homes, the blacksmith hammered slow rings into the cool morning air, and the saloon keeper swept dust from his porch. Nothing about the town looked ready for the kind of trouble building on the horizon. Yet she felt it tightening inside her, steady as a rope being pulled strand by strand. The reason stood right in front of her. A tall Apache horse, lean but proud, tied with a rough rope that bit into his neck. His hide carried the marks of a long ride, and his dark eyes held a silent plea that struck her deeper than any spoken word could. Folks in Red Bluff liked to pretend they understood horses. But few saw what she saw in this one. Strength, fear, loyalty, and injustice. She had always been known in town for having a sharp eye and a stubborn heart. That stubborn heart was the real reason she had the job at Miller's Livery in the first place. She worked harder than most men, lifted feed sacks heavier than her own frame, and trained every horse that came through with patience folks often mistook for softness. But nothing about her was soft when it came to what was right. The trouble started when a dusty ranch hand rode in claiming he had captured an Apache horse during a skirmish near the foothills. He boasted loudly about how he had taken it from some riders who had scattered into the hills. He laughed as he bragged about how much money he would make selling the horse to a trader up north. The way he slapped the animal's flank with the end of his rope made something hot rise in her chest. She had seen mistreated horses before, but the cruelty in his eyes was something else entirely. She walked out from the stable before she even realized her feet were moving. The ranch hand turned toward her, half surprised and half annoyed. As if her presence interrupted his own celebration, she told him in a steady voice that the horse was hurt and scared, and no decent man brought a living creature into town tied so tight it could barely breathe. She told him the horse belonged to someone and not to a man like him. The ranch hand sneered and told her to mind her business, said a woman didn't know a thing about Apache horses or Apache warriors. He said the horse was spoils of a fight and anyone with sense would keep their mouth shut, but she could not do that. Not then, not ever. She stepped between him and the horse, her stance sure enough to draw a crowd. Folks paused along the street, watching her with that look townspeople get when they sense a storm forming. She knew most of them expected her to back down. They knew the ranch hand had friends, men who drank too hard and picked fights too often. She knew it too. It didn't matter. She loosened the rope with her own hands, ignoring the ranch hand's sharp warning. The horse exhaled in a soft tremble, and the moment broke open something fierce inside her. When the ranch hand tried to shove her aside, she stood her ground. She told him no horse deserved that kind of treatment, Apache or not. She told him the animal needed care, not cruelty. The ranch hand snapped then, shouting that she was siding with Apache people against her own town. That was the moment her boss, old Miller himself, hurried over. The crowd shifted. The morning sun glinted off the dust rising between them. Miller looked from her to the angry ranch hand and back again, his face tightened with worry. He did not want trouble. He did not want arguments with ranchers. And he did not want to choose between loyalty and business, yet he chose. He told her she was fired, just like that. No discussion, no hesitation, no thank you for all the years she worked on to dusk. Fired for protecting an Apache horse the town saw as nothing more than a burden and a warning. The ranch hand smirked as if he had just won a battle. The crowd quietly dispersed with the strange guilt of people who watch something unfair happen and choose silence. She felt her heart pound like a hoofbeat inside her ribs, but she did not let them see the disappointment on her face. She only placed a hand on the horse's neck, whispered something meant to calm him, and walked away. She knew she had done the right thing. But right things rarely paid wages, rarely kept a roof over a person's head. She walked down the road with her hat pulled low, her steps slow, trying to understand how fast life could turn from steady to broken. She had loved her work. She had loved the horses she trained and the quiet peace that came with caring for them. Now she had no job, no income, and no idea what would come next. Still, she did not regret it. Red Bluff felt different as she walked back toward the edge of town. The mountains in the distance looked darker than usual, and the wind carried a strange charge through the sagebrush. Folks who passed her glanced her way with quick, uneasy looks. News traveled fast in small towns. By the time she reached her small cabin at the far end of the main road, she could already feel more eyes on her than usual. She set her things down, trying to shake off the weight of the morning. But the image of the Apache horse stayed in her mind like a shadow that would not lift. The horse belonged to someone. Apache warriors treated their horses with honor. If that animal was here, tied and mistreated, then something had gone wrong in the hills. Something big. As she stepped outside to gather water, she noticed more dust rising from the far trail beyond the fields. At first, she thought it was another rancher coming into town. But the dust rose too fast, too steady, too heavy. A seasoned rider could tell when a single horse made a trail and when a group made one. This was no single rider. Her pulse quickened. She shaded her eyes with one hand. In the growing haze of dust, the shapes began to appear. Lean horses, straight backs, strong shoulders, sun glinting off decorated shields and feathers catching the wind. A wave of riders moved toward Red Bluff with purpose, the kind of purpose that made a person swallow hard and stand still. They rode in formation, silent and powerful, each one guiding their horse with perfect precision. And at the front, tall and commanding, was a man she recognized from stories whispered across campfires, the Apache war chief. She stood frozen as the riders drew closer, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. The townspeople began to gather behind her, their chatter turning into uneasy murmurs. The war chief's presence here made no sense. Not unless something grave had happened. Then she realized it. The horse she had defended. The ranch hand's story about taking it during a skirmish. The marks she had seen on the animal. If the Apache war chief was riding into Red Bluff, it was not for trade, not for peace talk, not for chance. He had come for something or someone, and the moment their eyes met across the dusty road, she felt the world shift under her feet. The war chief looked straight at her, not at the sheriff, not at the ranchers, not at the crowd. Her breath caught as the riders slowed to a halt. Whatever was about to happen next would change everything for Red Bluff and for her. The riders stood still at the edge of Red Bluff, their horses breathing slow and steady as dust settled around their hooves. Folks in town kept their distance but stayed close enough to whisper. Some held their breath. Some tightened their hands on their belts as if that alone could steady their nerves. She stood bare inches from the path, unable to move even though every part of her told her to step back. The Apache war chief did not blink. His gaze stayed locked on her, calm but sharp, like a hunter studying something he could not yet name. His horse shifted under him with the kind of discipline only a warrior's mount carried. She felt a chill run along her arms, not from fear, but from the strange certainty that this moment had been set in motion long before dawn. A few paces behind her, the sheriff cleared his throat. That sound usually carried authority. Today it barely reached the air. He stepped forward, tipping his hat, forcing a polite greeting that sounded thin even to his own ears. The war chief gave no reply. Instead, he finally broke his gaze and looked toward the center of town, surveying the buildings, the people, the land itself, measuring everything with quiet control. Then he spoke. His voice was low and steady, carrying across the dusty street without effort. He said he had come for something taken from his people, something brought into this town without honor. Word spread through the crowd in quick jolts. Most already guessed what he meant, yet they still shifted uneasily. Pretending not to understand, she felt a tight pull in her chest. The horse. The Apache horse she had defended hours earlier. The one taken from a skirmish that the ranch hand bragged about. She thought of the marks she had seen on the animal. The fear in its eyes. The way it calmed under her hand. Everything inside her told her the horse belonged to someone in this very group. The sheriff tried to speak again, offering a stiff explanation, but the war chief raised one hand, silencing him with a single motion. There was no anger in the gesture, just firm authority. The Apache riders behind him remained still, watching the townsfolk with unreadable expressions. Their silence made the moment stretch painfully thin. She knew the ranch hand had taken the horse to the trader's barn on the west side of town before heading to the saloon. She wondered if the war chief already knew. She wondered if he had followed the tracks himself. Apache riders read land better than most folks read newspapers. The war chief turned his gaze back to her. Something in his expression shifted slightly, like recognition or curiosity. She remembered how she had stood between the ranch hand and the horse, how she had loosened the rope, how she had spoken without hesitation. She did not regret it, but now she felt the weight of that choice in a way she had not expected. A choice that had cost her a job and now tied her to a conflict she did not yet understand. Instead of riding into the heart of town, the war chief nudged his horse toward her. Slow, careful, intentional. Folks around her stepped back fast, giving space they did not dare refuse. She stayed rooted in place. Running would have looked like guilt. Pretending not to notice would have looked like fear. She had neither. When he stopped in front of her, the horse lowered its head as if acknowledging her scent. She felt the warm breath against her hand. It reminded her of the Apache horse from the morning. Same calm strength. Same steady presence. The war chief asked her a single question. His words were clear, shaped with precision. He asked if she was the one who freed the horse from the tight rope. She swallowed, then answered yes. Her voice did not shake. She told him she did it because the animal was suffering. Because no living creature deserved that. A few folks gasped softly, as if admitting such a thing to the war chief meant siding against the town. But something changed in his eyes, respect or maybe just acknowledgement. He told her the horse she defended belonged to the young brother of one of his riders, a skilled hunter, a loyal fighter. That horse was trained since it was a foal, taught to follow Apache commands only. If the horse was captured, then something grave had happened to the young brother. Her stomach tightened. The ranch hand's story about the skirmish came flooding back, and she remembered how he had smirked, how he bragged about riders scattering. She feared what that meant. Apache riders did not scatter without cause. Something dangerous must have forced them apart. She told the war chief about the ranch hand, about the bragging, about the marks on the horse. She repeated every detail she could recall. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably behind her, knowing how quickly this could turn into something no one could control. The war chief listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each word. When she finished, he nodded once, slow, as if absorbing each piece and fitting it into a bigger picture. He told her he respected her courage, but he also warned the town that harming or stealing from Apache warriors carried consequences. His words were calm, but the silence that followed rang louder than any shout. The tension grew thicker. Even the horses felt it. A few townspeople stepped backward. Some pretended to check on their wagons. Others closed their doors quietly. No one wanted to be caught in the middle of something that could spark more trouble. She felt eyes on her. Some were accusing. Some were curious. Others were frightened. Losing her job had made her feel alone, but standing in front of the war chief made her feel the weight of that loneliness in a different way. She wondered if the town would blame her for what was coming, or if they would simply pretend she did not exist. The war chief told the sheriff he wanted the ranch hand brought forward. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now, the sheriff's jaw tightened. He knew the man would be drunk in the saloon by this hour. He also knew the ranch hand had friends who would not take kindly to being called out by Apache warriors. But refusing was not an option. The sheriff nodded and sent a deputy to fetch him while they waited. The war chief remained near her, his presence commanding but not threatening. The riders behind him spread out slightly, scanning the town with quiet alertness. She could sense their worry. If their young hunter had not returned with his horse, then they feared the worst. She felt sympathy rise inside her, heavier than she expected. She knew what it meant to lose something that mattered. Even if she did not know their pain, she understood loss. The silence stretched, broken only by the clatter of hooves and boots as the deputy ran toward the saloon. Folks watched from windows and porches, waiting for trouble to erupt. She stood steady, though her pulse raced. She tried to piece together the morning again, looking for anything she might have missed. Then her mind returned to something she had not paid attention to earlier. When she untied the horse, she noticed a broken leather strap hanging from its neck. It had markings on it. Apache markings. She had seen such patterns only once before, carved into a shield carried by a traveling Apache scout who passed through Red Bluff years ago. Those patterns told a story, a family, a name. She remembered them clearly. As she thought of it, she realized something important. If the horse belonged to the young hunter and the strap carried a family marking, then the war chief had likely recognized it, which meant he knew exactly whose blood might have been spilled in those foothills. The war chief glanced at her again, almost as if he sensed her thoughts shifting. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell him about the strap, but before she could, a commotion erupted near the saloon. Voices raised, boots thudding. A shout of warning, then the deputy appeared, dragging the ranch hand by the arm. The man stumbled, cursing, struggling to break free. Behind him came two of his drinking partners, angry and ready to fight. The riders straightened instantly. The war chief's jaw tightened. The crowd pulled back fast, clearing the path between the ranch hand and the Apache riders. And in that charged moment, when tension shot through the air like a drawn arrow, she realized something else. The ranch hand had not just taken a horse. He had taken something far more dangerous. And the consequence of that mistake was about to fall on Red Blue F. The ranch hand jerked against the deputy's grip, his face red with anger and liquor. Dust clung to his boots and shirt as he stumbled in the road, shouting at anyone who dared claim he had done wrong. His two friends followed behind him with that reckless confidence men often carry, when they believe their numbers will protect them. The townspeople shrank back, forming a wide circle as if instinct alone told them to keep clear. The Apache riders watched with unreadable faces, still as stone, their hands steady on their reins. One of them, a younger warrior with a scar running along his cheek, leaned slightly forward in his saddle. His eyes locked on the ranch hand with sharp focus, as if he was memorizing every movement. The war chief remained silent, though the way his horse shifted told her he was tightening control to keep the situation from exploding. The air felt heavy with the kind of tension that built moments before lightning struck. She stayed where she was, uncertain whether stepping forward or backward would draw more attention than she wanted. The deputy shoved the ranch hand ahead. He stumbled again and cursed loudly, only stopping when he saw the Apache war chief directly in front of him. The bravado drained from his posture. He straightened quickly, but his words still carried arrogance. He claimed the horse was abandoned. He claimed he had every right to take it. He claimed anything but the truth? She felt her jaw tighten at the lies. She remembered the marks on the horse, remembered the fear in its eyes, remembered the deep cuts that did not come from simple travel. She wondered whether she should speak now or wait, but her thoughts were interrupted when one of the Apache riders dismounted and approached the ranch hand. The rider asked where the young hunter was, the one who belonged to the horse. The ranch hand hesitated, darting his gaze toward the saloon as if hoping someone would back him. No one did. Not a single voice rose in his defense. He muttered something about a fight in the foothills, claiming they had not seen the Apache rider fall. But his voice wavered, telling more truth in his tone than in his words. The war chief finally spoke. His voice was calm, too calm for the storm building inside him. He asked the ranch hand if he had left the young hunter wounded on the ground. He asked if he had taken the horse knowing the rider was still alive. The questions were not shouted. They did not need to be. Each one struck harder than a fist. The ranch hand flinched. His two friends took a step toward him, ready to defend him, but the sheriff raised his hand sharply, stopping them before they made a mistake no one could take back. Even they understood the weight of the moment. Silence stretched again, thick and suffocating. She looked around and saw fear on every face. Not fear of harm, but fear of what might be uncovered. Fear of what their town might have allowed. Fear of how this would change everything. The ranch hand finally admitted something. He said the Apache hunter fell during the skirmish, but he did not check whether the man was alive. He claimed he had no reason to. He claimed the land was dangerous, the moment chaotic. But the riders knew the truth behind his carelessness. Apache people honored the fallen. Leaving someone behind without checking on them was a kind of betrayal that cut deep. The younger Apache rider moved forward, fist clenched. His grief was visible, sharp enough to wound the air around him. She wondered if the young hunter was his brother, or a friend, or someone he had trained with. She felt a heaviness in her chest, realizing again how much a horse could mean to a warrior. Losing both a companion and a mount was not something anyone carried lightly. Still, the war chief signaled his riders to stay back. He kept control even when the emotion in his eyes flickered with pain. He told the ranch hand they would search the foothills themselves. They would find the truth. But he warned the man that if the young hunter had been alive and abandoned, the blame would fall on those who took the horse. The ranch hand opened his mouth as if to argue, but the sheriff shot him a look that silenced him faster than any threat. The war chief then surprised the crowd by turning toward her. He asked if she would guide them to where the horse was kept earlier. His tone held neither demand nor request. It carried expectation, as if he already knew she would say yes. And she did. Without hesitation, the sheriff stepped forward, uneasy. He said she had no obligation to get involved further. She thanked him but refused to step back. She felt tied to this now, bound not just by what she had done earlier, but by something deeper. She could not explain it, but she understood it clearly as she led the war chief and two riders toward the trader's barn on the west side of town. The townsfolk whispered behind them. Some whispered fear, some admiration, some confusion. She felt all their eyes on her, but none of it stopped her steps. The barn sat quiet, its wooden boards creaking in the breeze. The trader had not returned yet from his supply run. When she pushed the door open, the familiar scent of hay and horses drifted out. In the far stall, the Apache horse stood alert, ears forward. Recognizing the war chief instantly, the horse stepped toward him, lowering its head. The war chief placed his hand on the animal's neck, whispering something in a soft voice. She watched the horse calm, watched the rider's shoulders ease slightly, watched the pain in the war chief's eyes deepen. The broken strap with the Apache markings still hung from the horse's saddle. Area! She pointed to it, telling them what she had noticed earlier. The younger rider examined it, tracing the markings with a trembling hand. His breath caught. She realized then that her suspicion had been right. The strap belonged to a specific family. The missing hunter's family. This time, the riders exchanged looks. Not anger. Not accusation. Something colder. Something heavier. They realized the young hunter might not just be missing, he might have been taken. The war chief knelt by the stall, inspecting fresh mud on the horse's hooves. He noted the pattern, the direction. He studied it with the trained eye of a tracker. Then he stood, meeting her gaze. He told her the horse had been ridden again after the skirmish. Short distance. Unsteady weight. Someone inexperienced had tried to control it. She understood immediately. The ranch hand must have struggled to ride the horse. That was why he had been so angry. That was why he tied it so tight. But that also meant something else. If he had trouble riding the horse, then someone else might have gotten involved. Someone who knew how to stay hidden. The war chief asked her if the ranch hand had spoken to anyone else before going to the livery. She thought back carefully. She remembered a shadow behind him. A man who had stayed near the fence, listening but not speaking. She remembered the way he slipped away when she confronted the ranch hand. She had not paid attention to him then, now she regretted it. She described him to the war chief and the riders. The Apache men exchanged another look, sharper this time. The younger rider stiffened. The war chief's jaw set firm. They knew something she did not. The war chief asked where that man lived. She told him the last house before the canyon trail. A quiet place where travelers rarely stopped. A place where a man could hide things without being seen. The war chief thanked her with a nod that felt heavier than any words. He told her they needed to move quickly. The ranch hand had taken the horse, but someone else might have taken the young hunter. And if that someone was the man she described, then the danger was far greater than the town believed. She felt the truth settle like cold wind inside her. This was no simple theft, no drunken mistake, no careless act. Something darker was moving through Red Bluff, and the Apache war chief was not the only one searching anymore. She was too. The war chief stepped out of the barn with a new determination, the kind that came from recognizing a trail others might overlook. The riders followed close behind him, the younger one gripping the broken strap with the Apache markings as if it were the last piece of his brother's spirit. She walked beside them, guiding them toward the quiet edge of Red Bluff where the canyon trail began. Each step made the air feel heavier. The wind carried a strange chill, as if the land itself sensed what was coming. The townspeople did not follow, but their eyes did. Curtains shifted behind windows. Doors remained cracked open just enough for someone to peek through. Folks whispered to each other, wondering why she walked with the Apache riders, wondering what danger had taken root in their town. She kept her gaze straight ahead. The truth mattered more than their whispers. As they approached the last house, her heart thumped harder. The place looked still, silent in a way that felt wrong. No smoke from the chimney. No movement behind the curtains. The house belonged to a man named Braddock, a trader who kept mostly to himself. He spoke little, bargained hard, and kept his past tucked away like a locked chest. No one knew where he came from. No one cared, as long as he paid his share and stayed out of trouble. But trouble had a way of staying quiet until it burst open. The war chief raised a hand, signaling his riders to fan out. She stayed behind him, her breath unsteady. Braddock's door stood slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. A bad sign. Apache riders exchanged tense glances. The younger one reached for his knife. Not in threat, but in readiness, the war chief pushed the door open with his boot and stepped inside. Shadows filled the cabin. She followed carefully, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Dust floated in the air like tiny sparks. Something in the room felt unsettled, as if someone left in a hurry. A chair was overturned. The table had scratches on its surface. The window overlooking the canyon was open, curtains flapping. Then she saw it, a strip of cloth lying near the hearth. Faded, but patterned with the same Apache symbols she had seen on the strap. The younger rider rushed forward, picking it up with trembling hands. His breath caught in his throat. His fingers tightened around the cloth. The war chief examined the floor. He knelt and brushed his fingers along a faint trail of dried mud. Then he looked toward the open window, eyes narrowing. Tracks. Someone had climbed out and headed toward the canyon. And not long ago, she walked to the window and peered out. The canyon stretched wide, its red walls rising like silent witnesses. A narrow path ran along the ridge, winding between boulders and dry brush before dipping down into a shaded hollow where travelers often camped. If Braddock had taken the young hunter, that was the place he would hide. Few in town knew the land as well as Braddock. He had once guided mining scouts through the cliffs. He knew every hidden gap and twisting trail. The war chief ordered his riders to mount. He turned to her, his voice calm but edged with urgency. He asked if she would guide them through the shortcut near the creek bed. She hesitated only long enough to understand the weight of his trust. Then she nodded. As they rode out of town, the sky began to darken with late afternoon clouds. The wind picked up, scattering dust along their path. Her horse galloped beside the war chief's, hooves beating in sync with her racing pulse. She had ridden this trail often, but never under such pressure. Never with lives hanging in the balance. When they reached the creek bed, the ground turned uneven. Rocks jutted out like hidden teeth. Sagebrush whipped against her legs as she leaned forward, guiding her horse carefully. The riders followed her without question, trusting her knowledge of the land as much as she trusted their skill. Halfway down the ridge, the younger rider pulled up sharply. He pointed to a cluster of rocks where the dirt was disturbed. The war chief dismounted, crouching low. There were tracks, fresh ones, a man's boots. And beside them, lighter impressions, dragging slightly as if someone weak or injured had been pulled along. Her stomach tightened. The young hunter was alive, or had been. At least when these tracks were made, the war chief looked up at her and nodded, confirming her fear and hope both. They followed the tracks deeper into the canyon, weaving through the narrow passages where the walls rose high and the air felt thinner. Echoes bounced around them, every hoofbeat sounding louder than the last. She kept scanning the shadows, half expecting Braddock to appear with a rifle aimed their way. They reached the hollow near dusk. Firelight flickered between the rocks, small but unmistakable. The riders slowed their pace, their bodies tense. The war chief signaled for silence. She felt her heartbeat thrum in her ears. They dismounted a short distance away. The war chief moved first, silent as a shadow, followed by two riders. She and the younger rider moved behind them, her breath shallow with the fear of what they might find. When they grew close enough to see clearly, her chest tightened. A small fire burned low. Braddock sat beside it, sharpening a blade. His face wore a strange mix of calm and irritation, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Behind him, against the canyon wall, lay a young Apache hunter, bound by ropes around his wrists and ankles. His face was pale, eyes half open, chest rising unevenly. He was alive. Barely. The younger rider surged forward with a sound that tore out of him. But the war chief grabbed his arm, stopping him before he gave their position away. Braddock glanced toward the shadows, sensing movement. He reached for something beside him. A rifle. The war chief moved quickly, stepping out into the firelight. Braddock stiffened but did not raise the weapon. Not yet. His eyes darted between the war chief and the surrounding darkness. She followed the war chief into view. Braddock's gaze landed on her, surprise flickering in his eyes, followed by something colder. He accused her of meddling, of turning the Apache riders against him. She told him he had taken what was not his to take. That the young hunter needed help. That this had gone far enough. Braddock laughed, a dry, harsh sound. He said the young hunter had seen something he should not have. Something Braddock was hiding in the canyon? He claimed he had no intention of harming the hunter, but he needed him quiet until he could leave town. The war chief asked him what the hunter had seen. Braddock hesitated, then shook his head. He said the Apache scout had followed him by accident, stumbling upon something meant for other eyes. She wondered what secret Braddock guarded so fiercely, why he would risk war to hide it. Braddock began pacing, his boots scraping against the dirt. He spoke quickly now, fueled by frustration. He revealed that he had found silver veins in the canyon and planned to claim the land for himself. The hunter had spotted him marking the rocks. Braddock feared the Apache would report him to the tribe, who respected the land and would stop him from digging. The war chief stepped forward, anger burning beneath his steady voice. He said the land did not belong to Braddock, that no man had the right to tear it apart for greed. Braddock lifted the rifle, pointing it toward the war chief. The fire crackled. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She felt the riders behind her shift, ready to move, ready to protect their leader. The young rider trembled with rage, wanting to break free, to reach his brother. She feared one wrong step would turn the entire canyon into a battleground. Braddock shouted that no one would stop him. Not the Apache? Not the town. Not her. His finger tightened on the trigger. The war chief held his ground, unshaken. And in that moment, just when the tension reached its peak, something shifted behind them. A loose rock. A soft grunt? The injured young hunter had opened his eyes fully, staring at the war chief, pleading silently for help. That tiny sound broke the canyon's stillness. Braddock spun toward the noise. The war chief moved, the riders moved, and she realized the next few seconds would decide everything.